running your bike without oil can cause obviously some serious damage, but on here we see some piston wear, both sides, a little bit less on this side on the front, but the main thing that will happen is your big end bearing is not going to get lubrication, and you're going to end up with a crank that does this. And so that up and down play will cause knocking, and likely your bike's not going to run. So today we're going to swap the crank out in this 2013 DRZ 400 engine. So after pulling the engine out, the first thing we're going to do, we're going to take the starter off. 2 bolts should just slide right out here. 2 hands would be nice here, but we've only got 1 today. Sometimes when they're tough, you can use a screwdriver and just pry it back a little bit. Starter, what I like to do is take the screws, put them back in the holes just a little bit, that way you don't forget where they go. So next what we're going to do is we're going to take out these screws. I already got them loose. This one's a little stripped out, so we'll just pull these off. And this cover should come off here. Sometimes they give you a little pry point here to help you out. Now we're going to set everything down in the order that it comes out. So we have the cover, we've got a washer, and then we have the starter gear. And the starter gear will just set down upside down right here on the cover, and we'll put that off to the side. Now you see there's the 1 screw down there, so don't forget to take the starter cover off, because if you don't, you're not going to find that screw. You won't be able to get the cover off. So we're just going to set these back in here. And we're going to use an 8mm. We're going to pull that bolt out from the inside, and then we're just going to go around the case.
All 8 mils. Right down here.
Okay, and this cover should just come off pretty easy. And it is magnetized, so it is going to be a little bit harder to pull off. So I'm going to get it off here. I'll be back in a second. All right, so now we got the cover off. What we're going to do is we're going to pull the flywheel. To do this, basically, you kind of need 2 hands. So what I'm going to do is put the phone down, but you need an air impact. I mean, there's other ways to get it off, but an air impact's usually going to be the best way. And what I'll do is I'm going to hold the piston with 1 hand, and I will use the air impact to pull that off. So let's pull that off real quick. So got the nut off. What I realized is that I cannot find my flywheel puller for this bike, which is a 38mm by 1.5 thread pitch. So what we're going to do is I'll show you another way to pull this off, but I will have to split the cases beforehand. So in the meantime, what we're going to do is just start pulling off the rest of the stuff on this side of the case. So we'll pull out the gear sensor, gear position sensor, the retainer for the countershaft seal, and all the screws around the case. Boom, 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 all of these. So we're gonna pull those out, and then I'm gonna flip the engine over on the other side. So I'll be back in just a second after I get all these out. All right, so we're on the other side of the motor here, clutch side. Basically what we're gonna do is we're gonna start pulling off all the bolts around the case. We're also gonna pull the oil filter out, pull the water pump off, And usually what I like to do is actually leave the clutch cover on when you pull this case off. Makes it a little easier, a little bit less work, but we'll have to end up pulling this one out of the clutch cover. I believe this one right here, this lower one down here, and I think also this lower one down here, but we could leave this one, and we should still be able to get the cover off. So we're gonna start pulling those out. I'll be back when I get all of those out and pull the cover off. All right, so got all the screws out. Looks like we can keep this one in here, this one in here. Now if you look, like this one is gonna be a short one, so you can see it only holds the clutch cover on. So we're gonna leave that one in. The one that came from up here is gonna be a longer one, so that's going all the way through to the case. So we're not gonna mess with that one. Water pump off, oil filter out. I use a rag, paper towel, clean all the oil out of there so I don't make a mess on the workbench. And this cover, sometimes they're a little stuck. This one seems to be pretty easy to get off here. All right, so we're off here. We're gonna peel this gasket back. We got kind of lucky on this. The gasket's gonna come off pretty easy, but if the gaskets don't come off easy, basically what you got to do is take a scraper. Tusk makes a great scraper set that you can use to clean off these extra pieces here. So you can either use a tusk scraper or very carefully use a razor blade just to clean off any pieces of gasket. Now some gaskets are going to be really stuck on there and you're going to scrape for a while. This one actually was pretty easy, so it came out pretty nice. So we're going to just leave all of this like that. Normally we would be doing a water pump rebuild on this one. We're actually just going to do the crankshaft due to what the client's financial budget is. So we're going to take that and put this crankcase off, cover off to the side. And what I like to do is take all the bolts that came out of that cover and put them into there so that we don't misplace them. Now what we're going to do is we're going to pull the clutch off. So we've got these, I believe they're 5mm. Allen heads. So yep, it's a 5mm. So we're going to pull all of those out. And once we get the plates out, we're going to pull the clutch off. Now if you notice on this one, your one clutch plate sits into the basket. The rest go down the slot here, but your end plate's going to go right here in this tab. So don't forget that you're going to do that. Otherwise your clutch isn't going to work very well. So we'll pull that off and we'll be back in a second. All right, so we got the springs out. Like I said, I like to take the pressure plate and the springs. I'll put them back in the cover there. Now for what you got to do here, you got a little locking washer. So what I use is just a flathead, stick a flathead in there, and I will hammer that off so it sits flat like over here so we can get the bolt off. And the next thing what we're going to do is just remember, I mean, you got to have an air impact. Like this is one of the best tools I have in the garage. I don't remember what I paid for this one, but I know it was probably less than 200 bucks. It's worked for every single nut that I've had to take off, except for less than what I can count on one hand. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna knock this down flat. We're gonna put the air impact on it. We are gonna pull this nut off. Like I said, if you leave the plates in there, it's gonna create some resistance so this doesn't just spin around freely. So don't pull your clutch plates out quite yet. Once we pull that off, we are also gonna pull the crankshaft nut right here and the balancer nut right here so that we can pull all of this apart. So once I do all of that, I'm gonna come back and we'll go over disassembling the oil pump down here and everything else. So I believe these are, maybe it's a 27. This might also be a 27 and probably a 17 right here. So we're gonna pull those off and I'll be back here in just a minute once I get those off. All right, so we got the clutch off. I like to, again, keep everything in order. There's a little collar back here that will slide out. So you just want to make sure you get it off of the shaft there. So we got that off. Again, we're going to set that in our case right there. And the next thing we have, it was this nut. Now, what I failed to mention in the first one, this is actually going to be a left-handed thread. So it is going to be righty-loosey, lefty-tighty. So to pull it off, you're going to have to go the opposite direction. So we got that one loose and pulled off. Again, washer here, nut on top. We're going to pull the gear out. And like I said, I like to set everything in the order that it comes off to make so you don't put it back together wrong. There's a little locking tab in there, so we're going to set that with that stuff. We'll put it off to the side here. So now we're able to actually get the cam chain out. So we're going to pull this out really quick. We might have to pull off the guide right here, so we're going to pull that guide. This one was standard, regular, righty-tighty, lefty-loosey, so we're going to pull this off and put it in order again. And if we can get this gear out. So got the gear off. Don't lose the springs that are in here, you're going to need those. So let's set that in order, put it over here. And you do have another locating pin right here. So we're gonna pull that out. I might need to get a magnet to do that. So the next thing that we're gonna do is we're gonna start disassembling the oil pump right here. So I'm gonna pull this off with some snap ring pliers. Careful, this can break pretty easily. And these 3 screws, the oil pump will come out. We can pull the shift shaft out right now. If I can get it. Shouldn't be stuck in there, but sometimes they do get stuck. So I'm gonna just give it a couple taps from the other side. Oh, excuse me. There's actually a snap ring right there. So we'll pull that snap ring off, pull the shifter shaft out, and I'll come back when I get all of that done. Now, if you notice too, I just found 2 springs. These springs and these little pins go with your gear selector sensor. So you're gonna put that there, or neutral switch sensor, whichever you wanna call it. So we're gonna pull all of this apart, and I'll be back in just a second. All right, so I got the oil pump out. I got the rear chain guide off. So now we can pull off the cam chain. So we'll pull that off, set that to the side. And the oil pump, just make sure there's a little locating pin that holds this in there. Now, if you notice, there's also a dot on there. You want to match up the dots on both sides. So we've got a dot on there, and we're going to match them up. They don't need to be lined up, but they want to be on the same side. That way your oil pump runs the same when you put it back in. So we'll put that off to the side, along with the 3 screws. So I pulled the snap clip off of the shift shaft. There's also a washer on there, but I want to note that when you pull this out, that you have a thrust washer down here. So don't lose that. Make sure it gets back onto the shaft. So I always put it back on there, and then what you can do is we'll put the washer that went on the other side and the snap ring. I'm not going to snap it all the way down, but I'm just going to set it on there, and everything's in order so that you don't misplace stuff. So the next thing that we're going to do is we are going to pull off the crankshaft gears here, and again put everything in order. So I'm going to pull all these off. Notice you have a dot right here and a dot on this gear. These are going to end up lining up when you put everything back together to find top dead center for the balancer. So that, and notice you have another locating pin right here. So we're going to use the magnet to pull that out, hopefully. We're going to set that with everything there. So now we got our crankshaft. Now also too, if you notice, you have a washer right here. Now this goes behind the the guide, the chain guide. So we're just gonna put this on this bolt right here, so again we don't lose it. So the next thing we're gonna do is I am gonna take out the shifter drum gear shifting mechanism. So we'll pull these two screws. Be careful, these are spring loaded, so they will fly out. So try to keep everything together from here. And then what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna go around and I'm gonna pull all the rest of the bolts around the case. There's none up here. Got one right here, over here, and then all of these. So we're gonna pull all those, and then I will come back and I will show you how to split the cases using the Tusk case splitter. So pull those off and I'll be back here in just a second. All right, so I think we got everything out of this case that we need to split it. Now, what I like to do is we'll put the Tusk crankcase puller tool on here. Basically, if you don't know how to use this, you're just gonna thread in your 8mm tubes into evenly spaced. So we're probably gonna go here. I wouldn't like this tab right here because there's a chance it could break off. So we'll go probably on this hole, and probably one of these two holes right here. And then what we'll do is we'll tighten it down. I'll show you how that works here in a second. But for the gear shift, it's just going to be a 12mm. So I use a deep well socket for this one. And you got to use an impact again to pull that off. So that comes out. That's where your gears go. This would obviously be neutral right here, and then first, second, third, fourth, and fifth. So we'll put all that aside with the rest of this gear shift mechanisms. And I'm going to go ahead and get this set up, and then as I'm doing it, I'll start videoing again here to show you how it comes apart. So I'm going to do this. I'll be back in a second. All right, so I got the Tusk tool hooked up. As you can see, it's threaded in. Try to go in a decent amount on each one so that it doesn't strip the threads. And then you line it up with your crank. You're gonna have a 17mm up here. I do not use power tools for this, so you will do this by hand. So I'm not gonna be able to show you me loosening it because I need both hands for that. But what I realize is that you have an oil feed line here with a long bolt. So if you notice, the long bolt probably goes through to the other side of the case. So this does also need to come out before you open the case. So we're gonna just pull that out and put it off to the side. And what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna pull this off and I'm gonna start going slowly. And as I'm doing that, I'm gonna watch in between the cases right here. And I am gonna make sure that it's coming apart nice and evenly. And now if there's any, there's gonna be some resistance as you're tightening this bolt down to split the cases. However, if it's not coming apart evenly, or if it's really hard, I'm gonna stop and I'm gonna recheck everything and make sure that I got all the screws and bolts and everything out that connects the two case halves. Because if you keep pushing and pushing and pushing on it, you can crack the cases with these bolts, damage all kinds of stuff. So this is a very slow process. It's going to be, sometimes it goes easy, sometimes it takes a little longer, but we're going to just start slowly wrenching that down. And as it wrenches down, I will show some of the progress on it. So I'll be back in a second with that. All right, so starting to crank it down. As you can see, it's starting, the cases are starting to split. It looks like it's coming apart pretty evenly. So I'm gonna keep cranking on it and we will get this thing apart here. So as I'm pulling it further and further apart, you can see the rear part of the engine is actually still staying together. So what I like to do is just make sure, hey, that I got out all the screws, which it appears that I have. So what you can do is you can kind of just take a rubber mallet here and give it a couple taps. And as you're giving it the taps, it should come apart a little bit more. So I'm gonna do that and try to get the case a little bit more even. If it won't go even, what you can do is you can actually loosen up your case splitter, and you can try to get the case halves a little bit more together so that it comes apart more evenly. Because if they don't come off perfectly even, it's gonna put a lot of tension on the case. So we'll hit that together. We'll come back here. And again, I've only got one hand, so it's going to be a little hard, and I might have to do it off camera. But yeah, so you want the case to be even. So we got it tight here, all the way to here where there's a big gap. So I'm going to get it about a little bit more even, and we'll come back in a second. All right, so we're pretty much there. See, we got a nice gap here all the way around to the front. So I think we just have a couple more turns here, and it should just come apart here. So give it a couple more turns. It's moving really easily now, so I think we're just to the point where it's separated all the way. So what I'm going to do is I am going to remove the crankcase splitter tool, and I'm going to set it on its side, and I will come back once I get that cover all the way off. All right, so now that we got the cases split, it wasn't very difficult. Everything came apart pretty smooth. We're going to go ahead and pull the transmission out. As you can see, obviously the crank is right here. Usually I will replace most of these bearings and all the seals. However, the owner of the bike does not want to replace them. So we're going to end up replacing the crank bearing on both sides and all the seals, but not the transmission bearings, which to me doesn't make sense, but this is what they want. So one thing you can also do is just go ahead and clean up your case halves really good. Make sure you don't have anything on there. Make sure they're nice and clean, so when you reseal them, they hold very tight and you don't get any oil leaks, because it's a pain if you do have an oil leak. You gotta do all the work over again. So to pull the transmission, basically what you do is you're gonna pull out the shift shaft rods for the front and for the rear. And what I like to do again is go ahead and pull the shift drum out. Sometimes it takes a little wiggling. Sometimes it comes out easy. This one's gonna take a little wiggling. So we're gonna set that off to the side. And what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna pull the shift fork out, and I'm gonna set it onto the shaft so that we don't misplace anything and we don't flip the direction. And again, for the rear shift forks, again, we're going to push this one to the top, and we're going to pull the lower one and also put that on to the shaft so that we don't get them confused, so we don't forget the orientation of them. So it'll be like that. So the next thing we're going to do is we're going to pull the transmission out. I definitely need two hands to do this, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to reach through from the back side. I'm going to push it, and I'm going to hold everything and keep everything together. If you notice, there's a washer right here. You don't have a washer on that side. You can also check the bearings for washers. I don't think you're going to see any on this bike except for this one. But when we pull the transmission out, we're also going to want to check on the other case half for washers too. So I'm going to go ahead and pull the transmission, and I'm going to... All right, so I skipped a couple steps on the video. Somehow the video got messed up, but basically what I did was I pulled the flywheel. I use a flywheel pulling tool. You can refer to our other video on how to pull a flywheel. It's going to be the same for this one. What I also did was I pulled out the transmission and all that on the last video. I replaced the crank bearings right here, so there's one here, there's one in here. Now the Tusk puller tool doesn't have an adapter for this left-handed reverse thread to pull it through. So all I did was take the crankshaft, I put it in the freezer for about 30-45 minutes, and then I heated up the bearing with on the other case with a torch, and it just slid right in, and you see it just went right in there, super easy. So this in the freezer, take the bearing that's behind there, which is the same as this one, heat it up with a torch, and it just slid right in. So in the rest of the video here, what I'm going to do is I'm going to start putting the transmission in and getting the cases together. So we'll be back in just a minute. All right, so now we're going to put the transmission in. There's a washer on the back side of the counter shaft, so I'm going to just set this in here, make it a little bit easier so it doesn't fall off. And then we're going to take the shafts. You should see they line up pretty evenly here, so they're pretty flush. So we're just going to take them and we're going to just kind of get them in there. Sometimes these go in easy, sometimes it's a pain. Gonna slide it in there nice and easy. So they're not quite all the way in there. What I'll do is I'll just take a little mallet and just kind of tap them both until they seat all the way down. And now if you can see there, it's kind of hard from that angle, but they're really flush right here. And you're not going to get them to spin until you get the shift drum in there. So for now it looks good. They're nice and flush right here. There's, like I said, there's no washers on either side. We got a washer here, collar right here. Looks like everything's in place. So the next thing we'll do is we're going to put our shift forks in. The way you do this is just pull your lower one off. Remember, we put them in order before. You're going to line this hole right here, and we're going to put the top one in like that. We'll put that off to the side, and then again we're going to put the front shaft fork in there, and then we'll put our shift drum. This is going to be for the side that the shifter goes on. So we're going to put this in downward. So now that that's in there, what we can do is we can pull our shift forks up and align them in the hole. The one for the front's going to go in the middle slot of your shifter. So that's going to go in there. Put this one in here, and the lower one goes in the bottom slot. And now you could do this in either case. You could do it in this case, or you could do it in this case, but if you remember from the last part of the video, I actually had to put the crank in this side because the tusk puller didn't have the right attachment to pull it through, so we're going to be setting it up on this side. But you can set it up on either side of the case. Use some wood blocks to hold it up to let the shafts go through. Then we're going to drop our locator pin in there for the forks in the front and in the rear. All right, so that looks like everything's set in there pretty good. So now you can see you can spin the transmission really easily. I like to just kind of twist it, make sure that everything's moving properly. You see each of the shift forks going up and down. So that's all your gears right there. Perfect. So that's that. So what I like to do is just double check and make sure there's nothing that I'm missing from inside of the case before we start putting on our gasket sealant. It looks like everything's in here that we had removed from the inside of the case before we split it, after we split it. So let's start putting some sealant on here. What I like to use is 3-bond 1184. I use this pretty much between every case that I do, and I've never had an issue, knock on wood, with leaking. So what we're going to do is we're going to put a nice thin coat of this sealant all over the case, and then we're going to put the other half on. So what I like to do is just take a little bit and just work your way around the case here. So I'm gonna do this and I'll be back when it is all covered with sealant. You're gonna wanna make sure you get it done, get it done pretty quick so that this doesn't have time to dry. So let's start putting it on. I'll be back in just a second once I get it all coated here. All right, so I've just remember we're going to change out these seals here. So I'm going to use the seal pulling tool and pop out the seals here. These will get swapped out, and we can do this. I can put these in after it's on the cases are together. Sometimes these things are a pain to get out, but I'll try to pull it. This one seems to be giving me a problem here. There we go. So that's out. All right, so if you see, I got all the gasket sealing on here. If you see, there's a couple of spots that's really hard to get it onto because the crank's in the way. So what I did was I just put it on the other side of the case, and when it seals, it should seal it pretty good. Put it off. All right, so let's take these now and set everything down here. So I'm gonna also use just the rubber mallet here and just kind of tap it on there. Now for most bikes, you'll actually need to use the crank pulling tool, which is right here. Basically set these on here, put this all together like this. And this one doesn't need it, but I'm just gonna show you guys, for instance, if you do need it. So you'll take your crank pulling tool and you'll screw it in here. This is a Tusk one, works great, like all the other Tusk products. So you screw it together. Oh, let's put this in here like this. So then what you would do is drop this down. Like that, and then these metal rods go underneath here. And then what you do is you just tighten this nut down, and we'll snug the case up with a crank up with the cases while we have this on here anyways, just to give you an example. But sometimes you'll actually have to pull the crank through on most bikes, and then you just tighten that down, and that'll squeeze your cases together. And again, just like when we took it apart, you want to make sure it's even going down. So this one looks pretty good, looks to be sealed up. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to pull this crank puller off.
Okay, so we're done with that.
All right, so now our cases are together. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to go through and I am going to put in the screws that we took out on this side, which looks like there's only a few here. So let's get these together. Just need to locate them. Actually. All right, so I've located my screws. Basically, I just drop them in. And what I do, you know, because I don't keep track of which ones go. You see we got all different lengths here. So the easiest way is actually just to drop it in the hole and see how far it sticks out. Now this one is kind of hard to see, but you can tell that that's obviously not the right one because it sticks out too far. So we're gonna go to a shorter one. And that's about right there. So that's how far they're all gonna stick out. So as you just move around, you can just go through and figure out where they stick out. So that one would be there. That one would be there. So I'm gonna go through and I'm gonna just tighten all these up to get the case together here. So try to find where this one goes. These are all too long. So that one goes there, this one, and that one also. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna zip these in. This will squeeze the case together the rest of the way. And I like to do a cross pattern here.
All the way around.
So that looks pretty good. So we've got all the screws in. I think we're missing one here, which we'll find here shortly and put it in. But you know what I'm going to do next is I'm going to flip the engine back over, set it back up on the wood blocks, try to get it balanced here. And we'll go through and put the bolts in on the other side. If you remember, we had this oil pipe right here that basically sits through the cases. Just need to align it down here on the bottom. So that'll sit like that, and we'll put the screw back in. And we've got a couple more screws here. I believe one goes right here. And I think this one goes back on the other side. Got mixed in with the wrong bolts. So we're gonna snug those down. So that's it. We've got all of our bolts in. We'll go back and check the other side. And you see that one's too long, so that doesn't belong there. So we're gonna figure out where this one goes, and we'll be back in just a second here. All right, so we're gonna put the clutch side together first, but before we do that, let's throw in the new shift shaft seal. I already put this seal in before the engine was put together. So these, you just wanna make sure you get them in there even. Most of the time you can just use your fingers to push them down. You know, it takes a little bit, but if you can't use your fingers, you can always use a socket and a little hammer just to kind of tap them in there. So we're gonna do that. And what I also like to do is just have a little bit of oil handy. You can literally just fill the cap up of your oil jug and just take some and just put it on the inside of the seal. That way when you're putting your shift shaft in there, you don't rip the seal. This is going to be the counter shaft spacer. If you notice, there is an O-ring in here. So I believe the kit we have looks like it has an O-ring in there. So we're going to swap that out really quick. So it's right here. So to get this out, because it's a pain sometimes, you can use a pick. So I try not to damage them when I'm pulling them out in case the kit doesn't have the correct one. But this appears to be the right size. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna try to put it in there. Let's see if it fits. So we got the new one in there. So then again, what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna just take some oil. I'm gonna put it on the inside. I'm also gonna put some oil on the outside. And we're just gonna slide this on there. Sometimes it doesn't go on super easy, but just put that in there. looks to be pretty good right there. What you want to do is make sure that the seal's not inverted either, that you then push the lips of the seals downward. So what I like to do to make sure that that doesn't happen is just take a pair of pliers. We'll use these bigger channel locks and just spin it and just make sure that the seal is seated all the way around it. And you can go ahead and wipe off some of the excess oil that you get on there. And it looks pretty good to me. So, all right, so now what we're gonna do is we're gonna flip the engine again here. We're gonna go in reverse order of how we took it apart. The last thing that we took off was the oil pump. If you can see, there's a couple dots here. Those are gonna face towards the center of the engine. So what I like to do is we'll just go to our little oil cap, just put a little bit of oil in there, keep everything lubricated so that when the bike starts up for the first time, there's some oil in there. So we're gonna go ahead and set that in there. And then we're gonna put a little bit more on there. And we're gonna go ahead and stick in the center part of the pump. And I'll try to get everything aligned here. So if you can see, there is a hole for the shaft that needs to get aligned. And that looks like it right there. So you have your alignment pin, make sure that doesn't fall out. Turn it the right direction. And so our alignment pin isn't quite centered, so we just need to make sure we get it in the center there so that it'll slide into the gear and then it's slid in. So just like that. So these 3 screws right here, they don't have any Loctite on them, but I am gonna just put a drop of Loctite on each one to make sure that they don't back out. I like to use the red Loctite. I know it says permanent, but I feel like on a bike, nothing is actually permanent. And then we're gonna go ahead and tighten these in. Just make sure they're snug. Perfect. All right, so now we're gonna assemble the shift assembly here. The last thing we took off was gonna be the shifter drum locator, which basically locates where your gears are at. So if you see there's a cutout here, you got a little tab here. I already put a little bit of red Loctite on here, so this is gonna be a 12 millimeter. What I find the easiest way is if you grab a screwdriver and you kind of can use it to hold the locator wheel down, and then that'll give you access to get into here to put your locator in. So it's all the way down now, and go ahead with the impact and just tighten it up. And then you can release the locator. So that's in there now. The next pieces that we're gonna put in are all of the small pieces. You can see I put everything in a bowl so I don't lose it. So on the DRZ, it's a little bit harder than some other bikes, but basically what we've got to do here is we need to get this in there with the spring-loaded metal brackets that actually link into your drum, so when you shift it, it actually moves it. All right, so now we're gonna put the shift locator assembly together. So basically what we're gonna do here is, I've already got one of the spring-loaded tabs put together. I'll show you how to do the other one. Sometimes they're not that easy. So we're just gonna put the little metal rod in there. And there is a spring below there that keeps it tension on it. So we just need to get it sitting on top of that. So that's going to be how it sits. Now what we're going to do to get it in there is we're going to squeeze both of them from the top. And this might take a couple tries, but once it goes in there, it should just kind of lock in place. Sometimes you can use a pick to squeeze them in. I think it's going to be this one that's holding us back. All right, so that went in pretty easy here. So leave it like that, and let's go ahead and put our screws in there. I said these have a little bit of Loctite on them that I put on a few minutes ago. So set this up. Always start these by hand so you don't cross thread anything. Perfect. So now that that's in there, we can put the shift shaft back in. So what we're going to do is, if you remember, we put everything together. We put the clip on there. So let's just pull that off. Pull the washer off. If you remember, we have a washer down here. This one stays on this side of the shaft, on this side of the case. So also the little spacer that goes right there. And then we're going to just slowly push this through. And you see the spring will locate on this pin right here, and it just slides right down. Cool. So then what we're going to do is we're going to flip the engine over here and make sure our seal's good. Wipe off any excess oil. We'll put the washer back on. This will hold our seal in there. And then we're going to use our snap ring pliers to get this clip all the way down. And just make sure that it's locked into the slot, which it is. So once that's in place, we're going to go back to the other side here. And at this point, what I like to do, so now that you have everything together, what I like to do is make sure that we're not going to do a bunch of work that we can't get back to. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to shift through the gears here and make sure that the bike's shifting, the engine's shifting good. So you can spin the counter shaft. You see the clutch isn't spinning right now, so it's likely that we are just in neutral right now. So what we're going to do is we're going to try to move our gears here. So what I might need to do is grab the shifter. We'll just take the shifter and we'll slide it on there. And we're just going to run through the gears and make sure everything's good. So that's first gear, and you can see the shaft is spinning again. And then neutral, so I'm spinning the clutch side and the shaft is not moving, that's going to be neutral. And we're going to make sure we get to second gear. There's second gear. Third gear. Fourth gear. And fifth gear, and that's it. So and then we're going to shift down, so that would be fourth, third, second, there's neutral, and there's first. So now we know that our transmission shifting properly. We can continue on putting the engine back together. It's always good to do this now in case you have any kind of issues with spacers or washers or whatever's in there, to make sure that you don't have to go back and take the case back apart. You can also jump in here and make sure that your crankshaft is spinning freely, which it is. We're hitting the balancer, but we will get that straightened out here in just a minute here. All right, so now we've got our balancer. So we're going to start on this side. And remember, we had a locating pin that I actually set in here. So this pin is going to need to go into the balancer shaft. So we're just going to set this in here. Okay, that's going to help us align the balancer to time the engine. So that's on there, and you see we have our dot right there. So what we're going to do is we're just going to set our washer on there, and we're going to lightly put our screw back on. All right, so we're going to line our dot up. Next, if you remember, we have another locating pin on the crankshaft. So we're going to slide this into the shaft. We're going to put our gear in here. And what we got to do is we've got to line the dots up here. So this is essential to make sure you get this right. So you see our two dots lined up right here. So that's pretty much that. And then what we're going to do next is we've got one more locator, which is going to slide right down here in the shaft, just like that. Oh, excuse me. We're going to put this on first. And then put that in. So that goes like that. And then we can put our gear back on. Our washer, you can see this is kind of concave. It might be hard to see in the video, but this is going to sit like this way. So it's going to go right here. And remember, this is a left-handed thread, so we're going to put that on left-handed thread. Next, we're going to put our oil pump gear on here. Use the snap pliers for this. So this is the gear that gets driven off the clutch to pump for your oil pump. Cam chain back in. And to do this, we might actually have to take this gear back off. Oh, it looks like we can get back below it. So cam chains in. Go ahead and put our cam chain slider in here. All right, so I'm gonna go ahead and get that tightened up, and then I'll be back in just a second. We'll get the clutch installed, and we'll be done on this side of the bike. All right, so what I'm gonna do now is I'm just gonna snug up the balancer and the crankshaft nut. So what I like to do is I will just hold the crankshaft so it doesn't spin. All right. And then we're going to go in, and if you remember, this one is a left-handed thread, so this one's going to be opposite, so you're going to be tightening to the left. And again, we're going to hold the crankshaft. that's all tightened in. So this is all good. Now we're going to throw the clutch back in there. So what we're going to do is we are going to start with the collar. And you want to be careful because you can break this gear when you're putting this in. So you want to make sure you kind of just take it easy here. I still have all my clutch plates in there, so all I got to do is just kind of slip it onto there. If you can see, there is a washer in the middle there, so just have to be careful of that. Get our teeth aligned. And now I'm getting caught on the oil gear, so just rotate it a little and you can see we made it around it. And if you can verify that the oil pump gear is spinning right there. Our dots are lined up here, so we look good to go. Set this on here, and this is just going to be a standard thread here. And again, to tighten this, we're just going to use an impact here, and we will hold the crankshaft again. This one's going to be regular thread. So you can hold it right here, and that should be good. So the next thing we're going to do is we are going to fold over the washer. I like to use channel locks, makes it super easy. So we're just going to bring it up and squeeze it in, and that's it. Perfect. So that's all done. And what we don't want to do is we don't want to forget our shifter rod. So this goes in here. What you can do is you can verify with the actuator arm down here that it's actually working. See, it's pushing it up every time I move the arm, so we know that that's all right. Then what we'll do is we will take our pressure plate here. I'm also going to put in the adapter here where it connects with the pressure plate. Stick our pressure plate on there. Make sure everything is nice and lined up. We still got our clutch plate, the last one on these tangs, and then the rest of them down here. So let's put our spring in. Again, start everything by hand, and then you can go through with the impact and tighten them up. I believe these bolts are about 10 or 12 foot-pounds, so we're not going to tighten them up very much, but just snug. So these are going to be 5mm bolts.
Like doing a crisscross pattern on these. Make sure it gets tightened out evenly.
So that's it. It looks like that's just about everything from this side of the motor. Set it in there. So we only have one dowel pin here. We need to just verify that you have a dowel on the other side, which we do. It doesn't want to come out, so we're not going to pull it out. Get a little more oil off there. So now what you got to do is you got to remember this gear needs to line up here. So sometimes you'll just have to spin the water pump to get this to seat all the way. So let's do this. Get our dowels lined up here. Our water pump gear. And this one went on really, really easy. So that's it. And again, what we're going to do is we're going to go through and we're going to figure out where all these bolts went, and we're just going to do the size test like we did before to find the right hole.
Looks like that one's going to go there. We have our long ones in the clutch cover, like that. So we have one short one. Looks like the short one's going to go there. One will go there. short one right here. Alright, so now, find my feet. We will just go ahead and tighten all these up.
All right, so now we can go back and we can put the water pump back together. I put the screws for the water pump in the cover, but we are going to change out the seal here. So again, a pick and go ahead and seal that in. And we'll just set this on here like that. Long bolt there. These are all the same length, so those are going to be the short ones. All right, let's find an oil filter. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put the oil filter in. I'll put the cover on and I'll come back and we'll do the other side of the bike here. All right, let's finish this thing up here. We're on the last little bit here. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna throw in the retainer for the countershaft seal. There is Loctite on here and there's a bunch of it, so we're not gonna add any extra. Should be good enough. So we're gonna set this in here. This will hold that seal in place so it doesn't come out. I'm not going in very easy because of the excessive amount of Loctite that was already on there. So just back it out here. So that's looking good. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to put the shift sensor in there, neutral sensor. So spring and then the pin. So spring and then the pin. You've got two of them right there. And so your sensor is going to be right here. I believe this went up like that. So we'll set that in there. I'm going to tighten these by hand a little bit. I'll go grab the 4mm, it looks like. Snug those up. Perfect. So next what we can do is we can actually put the flywheel back on. Take it apart here. So you have your starter bearing right here, which is a one-way starter clutch. So it needs to seat into here. If you're having trouble, just rotate it. It'll slide in there. The one thing you don't want to forget, which I always leave right here so I don't forget, is going to be the shaft pin so that it locates where your flywheel goes. Now we just need to find the nut and the washer. So washer. The nut. And we're going to turn the compressor on here. I'm going to get some air and then I'm going to tighten this down and I'll be back in just 1 second here. All right, so we're going to go ahead and tighten this nut up here, just regular thread. All right, so we got that tightened on. Next, we're just gonna make sure we don't forget the starter gear here. So, just gonna set this in there. All right, and then we're gonna put our gasket on. So now we'll take the cover. Remember, this is magnetized, so just gotta go slow putting it down. So I'm just lining the dowels up here with the gasket so we don't pinch the gasket. So that one's good. Perfect. So now we're going to do the screws again here, and we will just figure out which goes where. This is going to get put on right here. The long one goes up top. Snug all these down. All right, so now the last thing we're going to do here is we are going to put the starter gear in. So I'm just going to take it off the exact same way I took it off the bike here, and we're going to put this collar down in there. Make it easier. And we're gonna put, oh, we got a washer on there also. Just have to be careful not to lose that. And there's a gear in there, so you just have to twist it and it should slide into place. And that, let's pull our screws off here. And I believe our kit has the gasket for this, so we're going to swap that gasket. Again, try not to damage it, so if you have to reuse it, it's not damaged. So went in there really nice. Just kind of clean off the surfaces a little bit, make sure we get a good seal. Looks like we're lined up. Different fit on here. And if you see this, it's kind of hard to see from that angle, but the screws are going to pinch this cover down. Alright, so final steps here. Just a couple more things to put on. Flip the engine right side up, and we're going to put in the clutch shaft little retainer here. And then we can lastly put the starter back in. And that's it. That was the rebuild of a DRZ400 engine. So everything's in there. This is ready to get back and put into the bike. So what we'll do is we're going to put this into the bike and try to get a little video of it once we fire it up. We are going to be putting a big bore kit on this. So we're using Cylinder Works
Cylinder Works big bore kit. So this is going to be a 430, I believe a 433 cc. So it's a little bump up from stock. So we're going to put this in and we'll get it all fired up. Thanks again for watching, and we'll see you guys on the next video.